Live everywhere.
Daily Co's Radio on netrootsradio.com presents
David Walton. Kagro in the Morning Show. Now, here's David Waldman.
Hey, good morning, everybody. How you doing? It is Tuesday, March 28th, 2017, and I hope all is well with you. I hope all is well with the radio show today, too. We are facing dual threats of an unusual springtime, really anytime, morning thunderstorm in the D.C. area. We're usually for late afternoon thunderstorms. I guess it can happen anytime. Happens overnight, of course. Can stretch into the morning, but sort of popped up out of nowhere, and I don't think it was on the certainly wasn't on my radar. I don't know whether the actual people who use real radar might have had this on their radar. It wasn't on my radar because my radar is fake radar. Like fake news, I have fake radar, and apparently we're under imminent thunderstorm attack, and there's been a number of loud thunder claps in the last couple of minutes. I think it's mostly done. That means, if for those of you listening live in the Washington, D.C. area, about, I guess, I don't know, something like between 3/4 and 100% of all of our precipitation reaches you. It's just sort of the way the weather flows, so you might be getting that thunderstorm now. If you haven't gotten it yet, get into shelter. You will want it. It's brief but intense. And it really came at a bad time this morning. I was shuffling the second of the two kids to take off for school out the door this morning, and I told them, it's not that cold. It's warmer. You might want to go with your sweatshirt today. Plus, it's drizzling a little bit. I don't know if you want that down coat to get all wet. You want to avoid that. And as I opened the door to demonstrate that it was drizzling, it started to rain a little harder, and I said, all right, well, maybe I'll give you a ride. And by the time we got into the car, it's thunder and lightning, and boy, it would have been a messy walk. So anyway, D.C. is in for that one. You may hear some in the background. It may knock us off the air, I guess. It could electrocute me and come through. I think the double-sided tape on the inside of the pads now of my earphones will insulate me against any sort of lightning strike. Probably. It's very heavy-duty tape. And that, and the only other threat that looms is next door. I believe they're having their telephone lines replaced with fiber optic cables. And at one point, we were slated for that, and I asked them to actually cancel that. I didn't want them to do that in our house. I don't care, really. I mean, apparently it's offered at no cost, but I didn't want them to disconnect anything, so hopefully they don't go ahead and do that. Hopefully it doesn't knock us off the air when they are working on the neighbors. I don't know what they're installing over there, whether it's phone line or internet line. I mean, I guess you can use the same fiber optic cable for both. That's the whole point of the stuff, but whatever. Anyway, part of the whole collapse of everything from last week, was it? I guess the week before. I'm losing track now. Yeah, I guess it was last week. And part of the home phone line collapse thing was when I called for repairs. This was interesting that they pulled this trick on me. I called for repairs, and they said, oh, yeah, it looks like your area is in need of some repair. We'll come and install fiber optic line instead of your copper line, and that'll fix the problem. Can we schedule that for you? And I was like, what, really? That seems like an unusual fix for having no dial tone, but okay, I guess so. And they signed me up, and then they said, all right, we'll be there next Monday. And I said, you mean, you can't fix my phone? I can't get a dial tone until next Monday? That's crazy. I've never heard of that happening. Oh, well, hold on a second. I'll connect you with our local repair department. And it turns out that I guess any incoming service call, Verizon just grabs up, and if you don't have fiber optic line, they're dying to replace your copper line with fiber optic line. And I'm not entirely sure why. I'm sure it's better for their business model. They can offer you, of course, television and internet over the same cable, and I guess that's what they're after. I wonder if they dig up the copper cable and then melt down the copper and sell that, because that's pretty valuable too. I don't know whether that's as valuable as selling you the otherwise relatively close to free internet for $60 a month, but okay. I'm sure it has something to do with it. Anyway, I didn't want them to do that, and then it turns out most people who have gotten the services replaced kind of complain about it, because there's also the issue of the old copper wires, as outdated as they are, conduct their own electrical charge. In other words, your phone works during a power outage, right? When they replace your phone lines, your copper lines with fiber optics, it doesn't work that way. You have to have a battery pack that'll power your phone during a phone outage, and it only lasts, 8 hours or something. Not talk time, just all time. That's not a huge problem around here. Most of our power lines are buried, so when we're without power, it's not for very long. But I figured if there's no savings involved, and I don't want their internet or television service, why do I want to interrupt service? So I tried to cancel that, and then I wasn't sure whether they really were going to cancel it or not. Apparently, they're pretty insistent on this stuff, and they tell people who decline to have their wiring updated to the fiber optic cable, they say, well, if you don't, we'll cancel your home phone service. Although that's a threat that's really losing punch these days. And we're old-fashioned and we still have the home phone line here, but we've certainly given some consideration to just saying, why do we pay for this anyway? So I don't know. So they might come and dig up the phone lines in the middle of the program. We're not broadcasting via the phone lines, of course, but we are broadcasting via something else buried right next to it, so who knows what they're going to chop in half in the middle of the show. So if we disappear, it's probably not that we've been rendered to Russia or Turkey or wherever else the hot spot is today, and we'll examine some of those things going forward. Greg Dworkin has sent me an article, so that looks pretty interesting. He's not going to be with us today, of course, his new schedule being Monday, Wednesday, Thursday. So we'll wait until tomorrow to hear from him. Bill, back in the saddle up in Portland, Maine, sending out this morning's tweet. How you doing, Bill? Daily Coast Radio is live for 2 hours, mild-mannered. David Walton becomes the mighty Kagro X in tights. I didn't bring the tights. And I couldn't get on the airplane with them. That was the problem. Apparently I missed a large story somewhere along the line, which appears to have explained itself before I could get outraged about it. And I don't know that I was scheduled to have to check my agenda to see whether I was scheduled to be outraged by that thing or not. It's very tight scheduling these days. I read that I guess a couple of teenagers that were denied their seats on, I don't know anymore what airline it was, because they were wearing leggings. And was it that were they wearing nothing else? Is that the problem? Or they were wearing leggings as pants, as opposed to, back in my day they wore leggings maybe under a skirt or something. It was like tights, but I don't know. I guess now they wear them as pants, like yoga pants, and I guess they thought that was inappropriate or something. And I thought, since when do they have a dress code on airlines? They used to. Back in the old days, I remember as a kid, when we flew somewhere when I was little, we had to dress up. I don't know why that was the case. And then later in life, I heard that the idea was, well, if we want you to travel, we were traveling usually for an occasion somewhere that would require our dressing up when we got there. And we sometimes wore our suits or whatever we had that passed for suits when we were 6 and 7 years old. Then I understand that we were wearing them because it was easier to wear them and kept them in better condition wearing them than trying to pack them in luggage and hope they didn't get wrinkled. I don't know. But it seems to me that people used to dress up for air travel back in the old days. Now, of course, you dress for comfort. And why not? They charge you, they're going to charge you for everything, for water, oxygen while you're flying. I think you should be able to dress comfortably. I don't know what these people were wearing. Then I heard at some point, they were freebie airline tickets, maybe that go to friends and family, employees of the airline, and I guess those come with a dress code. Apparently, I saw that claimed online. I don't know why they do, but they might. And I guess if you're handing them out, and I don't know. I guess it's like seat fillers at the Oscars, right? You don't want people coming in leggings, I guess, to that, unless they're $5,000 leggings, in which case I guess it would be perfectly fine. I really don't know. However, I do want to turn my attention to a number of things, none of which are leggings, tights, or anything like that. Mostly, I would guess, foreign intrigue. We'll start off with Greg's article, because if he were here, he'd be going first. This from foreignpolicy.com by Max Boot, who, again, is a person whose name I see an awful lot. I don't know what he does. He's like an important guy of some kind. In the black and white it looks like sort of a pen and ink rendering of him. And I don't know whether somebody did a pen and ink rendering of him in the way they used to do for the Wall Street Journal, or whether this is simply an Instagram filter that's making him look like it's a pen and ink rendering. He is wearing a fedora, which is the international sign for serious media, serious press, of course. And Max Boot, here's a little description of him. Max Boot does not just have a cool, awesome kind of name. He is the Jean J. Kirkpatrick Senior Fellow for National Security Studies at the Council on Foreign Relations. So there. That's, VSP, very serious person, I guess. And today's very serious article, despite the hat, which, it was once considered to be a serious hat. Now it's a little bit of a joke. The Russia scandal has reached the Trump family. Again, I repeat, the Russia scandal has reached the Trump family. Thank you for waking up, sound effects guy, which is, of course, me. The Russia scandal has reached the Trump family.
Boring!
I know, as we all expected this. Once the sound effects come out, there's no stopping it, everybody. Only a special counsel, says Max Boot, can help find out how deep the rot goes. Max Boot. That's biggest boat in German, I think. I don't know what that's all about. Max Boot. Okay. Well, anyway, how deep does the rot go? The picture here is of the horrific-looking Donald Trump, again with his lips attempting to escape his face, sitting alongside Jared Kushner, who, as you know, was assigned the task of reinventing the United States government yesterday. This a sideline to Middle East peace, which he's also in charge of. And as I had to observe this morning, he's reinventing government along business lines. For years, of course, everybody has wanted to run government like a business. And there's a million reasons why that's not a good idea, but not everybody has gotten that quite yet. But I thought it was a good time to remind everybody that for years, Heartland Americans have likewise been demanding that we operate the Middle East peace process like a business, and a part-time business at that. And so, hallelujah, we finally got what we want, and as others have observed, this is, of course, how you're going to bring the coal jobs back. So it's all beginning to make sense. Max Boot doesn't think so, but it's probably because of the hat. These have been a choice few days, Mr. Hat says, for aficionados of scandal, as I am. Washington hasn't seen their like since the heyday of Whitewater, Iran-Contra, and Watergate. P-Gate not yet measuring up to this standard, I guess. In other words, for nearly 2 decades. And in many ways, Kremlin-Gate, bad title, the burgeoning scandal over Team Trump's connections to Russia, is in a class by itself. When in the past, in the course of human events, when in the past has an FBI director ever announced that his agents were investigating allegations that the president and his closest associates, including his senior advisor, cum son-in-law, were guilty of collusion with a hostile foreign power? Yeah, I don't remember that happening. He says never, and he's Max Boot. Max, how do you argue with a guy whose name is Max? Yet that's just what James Comey did on March 20th when he told the House Intelligence Committee that the G-men were looking into the nature of any links between individuals associated with the Trump campaign and the Russian government, and whether there was any coordination between the campaign and Russia's efforts. To make the event even more surreal, Comey and his fellow witness, Admiral Michael Rogers, before he was Admiral Rogers, he was just known as Mr. Rogers around town, but congratulations on the promotion, sir. Michael Rogers of the National Security Agency all but called their boss, the commander-in-chief, a liar by publicly dismissing his allegations that former President Barack Obama had wiretapped him. They are, of course, convinced that everybody has said the exact opposite, and they've had their suspicions borne out. And that may lead us to some of the rest of the stories of the day. Anyway, I have no information that supports those tweets, and we've looked carefully inside the FBI, Comey said. As for Donald Trump's desperate claim that Obama had asked Britain's GCHQ spy agency to wiretap him, LGBTHGCHQ, I think is how Donald Trump would say it. Rogers said, I've seen nothing on the NSA side that we engaged in any such activity, nor that anyone has ever asked us to engage in any such activity. And that's good. It is impossible to conceive of J. Edgar Hoover publicly calling out any of the presidents that he served in such a fashion. I guess I can imagine it. And yet Comey had good cause to do so because Trump has shown that he is prepared to smear the reputation of the intelligence community in order to save his own. That's true. And while Hoover was always paranoid about subversives worming their way into the government, not even he went so far as to hint at a possible conspiracy between the American president and the ruler in Moscow. Yet the jaw-dropping revelations were just beginning. 2 days after the House hearing on March 22nd, the Associated Press revealed that in 2005, Paul Manafort, Trump's erstwhile campaign manager, had signed a $10 million a year contract. Now, what a contract. I mean, you can't get quarterbacks paid that sometimes. With Russian oligarch Oleg Deripaska, and there's an I in there, it's not just Deripaska, that would be a good one. Why the contract? Why $10 million? To influence politics, business dealings, and news coverage inside the United States, Europe, and former Soviet republics to benefit President Vladimir Putin's government. Unquote. Now, that's, I guess, a quote from the Associated Press. I doubt very much whether that's what the contract says, but if it does, I gotta get one of those. Maybe with a better country. This comes on top of Manafort's already disclosed work on behalf of Viktor Yanukovych, the deposed Ukrainian leader who is a close Kremlin ally. White House Press Secretary Sean Spicer's clumsy attempts to distance the president from Manafort. He claimed that Trump's former campaign manager played only a, quote, very limited role for a very limited amount of time. Simply served to signal how serious this revelation actually is. And, of course, Manafort is hardly the only current or former Trump associate with suspiciously close ties to Moscow. We have only recently learned that Michael Flynn, Trump's first national security advisor, made $68,000, that's considerably less than the $10 million a year, while serving as a consultant to Russian firms in 2015. Campaign foreign policy advisor Carter Page maintained close ties with the Kremlin and its state-owned oil companies. Longtime Trump advisor Roger Stone has admitted to communicating with Guccifer 2.0, the moniker used by Russian intelligence to leak damaging information about Hillary Clinton, and with Julian Assange, the head of WikiLeaks, another Russian front organization. Questionable about that, I think, but certainly acting in concert, it would seem, over the last couple of months. I don't know whether they consider themselves a Russian front organization, but who does? Anyway, trust me, it will soon be the Podesta's time in the barrel. Stone tweeted, on August 21st, 2016, weeks before WikiLeaks began leaking emails stolen from Clinton campaign chairman John Podesta. Even Jared Kushner, Trump's son-in-law, it now emerges, met before the inauguration not just with Russia's ambassador to Washington, but also with Sergei Gorkov, who is close to Putin, was trained by Russian intelligence, and runs a state-owned bank that has been placed on a U.S. sanctions list. No one knows what they discussed, but it's possible that Kushner, whose family's real estate firm is desperate for foreign financing, was hoping to get an investment from this Russian bank to supplement the hundreds of millions of dollars that is sought from Chinese companies closely connected to the leadership in Beijing. One wonders how Kushner has time not only to deal with Russia policy, but also to broker peace in the Middle East, advise on relations with China, Mexico, and Canada, and reorganize the whole U.S. government. Clearly, Ivanka Trump married a man of prodigious and hitherto unsuspected talents. Yes, I would say so. It seems to be cutting into their time a little bit. Didn't interrupt the skiing, though. Perhaps there is an innocent explanation for all these contacts between Trumpites and Putinites. Perhaps. But the sheer scale of the communication and the efforts to conceal it, that's true, suggests the possibility of a nefarious connection that extends well beyond Trump's well-known admiration for Putin. If CNN's anonymous sources are to be believed, the FBI has information that indicates associates of President Donald Trump communicated with suspected Russian operatives to possibly coordinate the release of information damaging to Hillary Clinton's campaign. There is, to be sure, no proof that has yet been made public of such serious charges. They may well be false, but by now we do know enough to call for an energetic and impartial investigation, and it's doubtful that one will ever emerge from the House and Senate Intelligence Committees. Representative Devin Nunes, the Republican of California who chairs the House panel, has been particularly compromised, not just by his service on Trump's transition team, but also by his unbecoming eagerness to act as Trump's defender in this whole sordid business. On March 22nd, Nunes went so far as to reveal classified information suggesting that either Trump himself or his aides might have been caught as incidental subjects of legally obtained surveillance. Having apparently acquired this information the previous day from an intelligence official in the White House, Nunes did not bother to notify his fellow committee members. Instead, he rushed out to try to buttress Trump's indefensible allegations of wrongdoing against former President Obama. Trump predictably claimed vindication, but in fact, Nunes' information was hardly exculpatory. In the first place, even Nunes did not acknowledge that Obama did anything wrong or that Trump himself was the target of a wiretap. At most, Trump or his associates were caught chatting with someone else who was the target of lawful surveillance. This is a long, long way removed from Nixon-Watergate territory, as Trump has tweeted, even if the intelligence community did not do a good enough job of completely masking the identity of the Trump officials. In any case, it is hardly reassuring to know that Trump or his aides were in regular contact with the individuals whose communications were targeted as a part of a criminal or counterintelligence investigation. Nunes' revelation raises far more questions than it answers. Just which unsavory characters were Trump and or his aides talking to, and why? What were the motives of the intelligence official who was said to have leaked this information? And why are Nunes and Trump so selective in their outrage about leaking, only objecting when the resulting information hurts the president? The only way we will begin to unravel this mystery is with the appointment of a special counsel to lead the Justice Department prosecution and a bipartisan committee, either a House Senate Select Committee or an outside panel like the one that investigated 9/11, to lead the public inquiry. Such an investigation will either clear Trump's name or not. That's a bold assertion. It'll either do this thing or it won't. Well, that's probably true. Either way, it will provide some relief to the nonstop drip of revelations. Maybe. As the New York Times columnist Charles Blow reminds us, on November 3rd, the Trump campaign released a television ad claiming Hillary cannot lead a nation while crippled by a criminal investigation. The same is true of Trump. He cannot lead the nation while crippled by Kremlingate. It is thus in his own interest to facilitate a credible inquiry that will get to the bottom of this mess as soon as possible. Unless, of course, he has something to hide, in which case his present conduct, designed to obfuscate and cover up, suddenly makes perfect sense. Well, okay, I think that's a good table setting for everything. I don't know that it reveals anything new, but thanks, Max Boot, for bringing that up. I mean, I don't know. I guess, like I said, it's a good table setter. I thank you, Greg, for sending it over here, because that's where all the new, I mean, it all connects there. I don't know if it indicates anything in particular. It certainly doesn't prove anything just yet, but, I mean, that's the news, ladies and gentlemen. So we absolutely have, we have to go there. Speaking of all this stuff, let's see. What have we to offer in addition to this? Let's see. One, there's the weird story about Devin Nunes and his whereabouts the other day. And I grabbed this thing from Talking Points Memo the other day and didn't get to it yesterday, but it was much chatted about yesterday elsewhere. Nunes met source on White House grounds before making Trump surveillance claims. Everyone was wondering where he got this information about Trump or Trump-related figures being incidentally captured in what was probably FISA surveillance. Where did you find this out? And he wasn't willing to tell anybody. And now we have this information. The Republican chairman of the House Intelligence Committee met a secret source on the White House grounds. And that's an interesting way of putting it. In the White House, they don't say that. They say on the White House grounds. They mean outside in the bushes, like where Cheney used to hide during press conferences. Maybe. Although it's also been pointed out, well, that could mean the old executive office building. That's considered White House grounds, but it's a totally different building. Why doesn't say that you're meeting in the old executive office building? I don't know, but White House grounds, maybe that makes it sound more sinister. Maybe it was behind a tree. That is weird. And this is a strange thing to do. The story does have a lot of weird angles. to it, this particular Nunes story. So he met a secret source on the White House grounds the day before he went public with hazy charged allegations that members of Donald Trump's transition team had been picked up by incidental collection on foreign nationals. So Nunes on Monday confirmed to CNN that he clocked time there to view classified information in a secure area in order to, quote, confirm what I already knew. How? I don't know. Nunes said he was not at the White House itself, and it's unclear exactly what building he visited. So I guess being in a secure facility, if he claims that's true and it's not a lie, that means it wasn't behind a tree with or in the shrubs with Dick Cheney or anything like that. He later explicitly told Bloomberg's Eli Lake that his source was an intelligence official, not a White House staffer, and that their meeting location was chosen out of convenience. We don't have networked access to these kinds of reports in Congress, Nunes said. By his account, the intelligence reports he viewed are only distributed on a system within the executive branch, so the White House grounds were the most convenient secure location that had a computer connected to that system. Nunes was repeatedly refused, he has repeatedly refused to divulge the source for claims that communications involving Trump and his staffers were incidentally collected by U.S. intelligence agencies. Trump and his defenders have seized on Nunes' allegations as cover for the president's unsubstantiated claim that Trump Tower was wiretapped by his predecessor, Barack Obama. Citing a need to protect his sources and methods, because he's a spy, you see, Nunes has offered no further comment when asked point blank if the White House was the source for his revelations. He held a press conference last Wednesday, about his findings and privately briefed Trump about them without bringing the information to the rest of his committee. That, of course, is a huge no-no. These details add nude color. Nude color would be a great color to add to this, but I don't know whether that's the one that we added. It's new anyway. To what was reportedly quite an unusual day for the California Republican. According to reports from the Washington Post and the Daily Beast on Tuesday evening, Nunes was in an Uber, I knew we heard this somewhere, in an Uber with a communications staffer, not the top guy, I thought it was maybe the chief of staff. When he received a brief phone call, he immediately hopped out of the vehicle, ditching his staffer, swapped cars, and departed, according to the reports. Swapped cars, that's really something. Nunes pushed back on this reporting to CNN, saying, I was in a cab with staff, and we dropped them off before I went to my meeting. Anything other than that is just false. How do you get to that story then? I don't know. Whatever. Maybe somebody made it up. Where exactly Nunes went after taking that call isn't clear, but the Post reported that he did not visit the Director of National Intelligence, FBI, or National Security Agency that night. There are many secure sites outside of the White House where lawmakers may review classified information. The CIA, FBI, and several locations on Capitol Hill have SCIFs, or Sensitive Compartmented Information Facilities, which we were wondering whether Trump had for himself at Mar-a-Lago a few days ago. And I don't know whether we ever got an answer about that one. Okay, interesting. So that covers the Nunes hopping out of the car story, and no one knows where he's really getting his information and what he has to say about that. So I wanted all that on the record as well. Also very important. Okay. Let's see. Is there more that I need to add to some of these things or not? Let's see. Not really. I mean, I guess at this point we can move on to a couple other issues. Although, yeah, as I recall, there was something really interesting about this Washington Post piece. Before we move off of Nunes, I guess we can take a look at this one here. There was a piece in the Washington Post that I know I saw people tweeting around with a particular excerpt, and I don't have the excerpt handy, but chairman and partisan, the dual roles of Devin Nunes raise questions about the House investigation. Let's see. If I skim, I don't know if I'm going to, I don't know if it'll strike me which piece it was that I found so interesting, but Greg Miller and Karun Demirjian on the bylines in this piece. Chairman of the House Intelligence Committee was on his way to an event. We heard this part, right? In Washington late Tuesday when the evening's plans abruptly changed. After taking a brief phone call, Nunes swapped cars. That's his version of the story, right? No, I'm sorry. His version of it was they dropped off the staffer and then he just simply took another cab somewhere. Swapped cars, slipped away from his staff, and he appears to have used that unaccounted for stretch of time to review classified intelligence files brought to his attention by sources that he said he will not name. The next morning, he steps up to the mics and announces that Trump was spied on, basically, or that was his version of it, right? Within hours, President Trump was declaring that he had been vindicated for his tweets alleging the Trump Tower had been wiretapped. Public attention on the revelation that the FBI was investigating possible coordination between the Trump campaign and Moscow had shifted to questions about whether Trump officials were victims of spying abuse. And by week's end, a congressional probe capable of threatening Trump was consumed in partisan fighting and scheduling turmoil. Yes, since then, of course, all of the hearings scheduled for that committee have been canceled. And apparently, the new speculation is that at the behest of the White House, they are canceling opportunities for the likes of Sally Yates to testify. Interesting. The sequence was largely engineered by a conservative lawmaker from California's Central Valley who has emerged as one of Trump's most tenacious allies on Capitol Hill. Nunes, 43, has said he is committed to leading an impartial inquiry into Russia's interference in the 2016 U.S. election and search for any evidence of coordination with Trump or his associates. But Nunes, who served as an advisor on Trump's transition team, has also at times used his position as chair of the Intelligence Committee in ways that seem aligned with the interests of the White House. That's true. Now I think I remember what this article was selected for, and it may have been, it may occur down at the bottom, and we sort of hinted at it yesterday, and that was that he himself turns out to have been in some of the wide range of suspect meetings over the time between election and inauguration, and maybe even afterwards. The committee's course so far has raised concerns about whether it can serve the mission it was given when it was created in the 1970s, putting critical matters of national security above partisan politics. Former Republican Congressman Mike Rogers, who was Nunes' predecessor as chairman, not the admiral, said that both sides have struggled so far to live up to that historic mandate. It sows distrust. It shows that they don't have a good working foundation for really hard things, Rogers said. Everybody wants to find what they want to find to affirm their political position, and that's no way to run an investigation. Last year, Nunes repeatedly skirmished with intelligence leaders over assessments that Russia sought to help Trump win. He has sought to help the White House knock down news stories alleging close ties between Trump associates and the Kremlin, and Nunes has pushed his panel to focus on lines of inquiry, including hunting the sources of damaging news leaks that seem more favorable to Trump. Nunes' latest move came Friday when he made a flurry of announcements that on the surface signaled promising new investigative paths, including an agreement to hear testimony from Trump's former campaign chairman, Paul Manafort. But to Democrats, Nunes' actions seemed, again, to show the hidden agenda of the White House. Most immediately, Nunes canceled an open hearing that had been scheduled for Tuesday with former senior officials who have battled Trump, among them former acting Attorney General Sally Yates, who was fired by Trump, former National Intelligence Director James Clapper, who publicly disputed Trump's wiretapping claim, and former CIA Director John Brennan, who has said that Trump should be ashamed of himself over his behavior toward U.S. spy agencies. When Nunes announced the hearings, it appeared that Republicans would use the session to confront the former Obama administration officials over a raft of news leaks. But after the 5-hour performance of James Comey before the committee last week, widely perceived as politically damaging to Trump, GOP members worried about giving Democrats another open hearing to hammer away on Russian interference in the election and any Trump campaign ties to Moscow. Representative Adam Schiff of California, the ranking Democrat on the Intelligence Committee, said that he suspected the cancellation was driven by a very strong pushback from the White House. Schiff also implied he suspects a White House hand in what he called Nunes' dead-of-night excursion to view classified documents. Several congressional officials said they were told about the phone call and swapped cars by members of Nunes' staff. who Nunes alleges weren't even there in the first place, I guess, because he dropped them off first, which seems unlikely. Now, Jack Langer, a spokesman for Nunes, disputed the depiction. That account is inaccurate, Langer said. He declined to elaborate. That's not really disputing it so much as putting your foot down and saying, nuh-uh. But okay, I guess that counts as a dispute. To review classified documents without breaking the law, Nunes would have had to do so at a secure facility. Congressional officials said that the Director of National Intelligence, FBI, the National Security Agency, all of that, they all had indicated that they got no late-night visit from Nunes, a trip that probably would have been entered in security logs. Nunes has repeatedly refused to say where he went or whether the documents were provided by the White House, including when confronted by committee members during a closed-door meeting on Thursday. I guess the other article hints at where he actually did this now, on the White House grounds. White House spokesman Sean Spicer refused to rule out a White House role in providing access to the files. I don't know where he got the documents from, so I can't say anything more than I don't know, Spicer said during Friday's White House briefing. There are clues that such a transaction was coming. Trump said in a recent interview on Fox News that he would, quote, be submitting things before the committee very soon, unquote. And Nunes used his opening statement in the Comey hearing to issue a peculiar request for anonymous sources to bring the committee relevant information. Nunes and Trump could hardly have come from more disparate backgrounds, we're told. Nunes grew up among farmers in the flat stretch of the fertile land between Fresno and Bakersfield, California. He has said that he began buying cattle as a teenager and earned an agriculture degree at Cal Poly San Luis Obispo. But he showed early ambition and aptitude for politics. After serving on the board of trustees for the community college he had attended, very good, Nunes was elected to the House in 2002. He became a protege of former House Speaker John Boehner, who tapped Nunes as chairman of the intelligence panel in 2014. On Capitol Hill, Nunes is known more for his skills as a political operator than his expertise on policy. He can be intemperate and is a fierce protector of allies. He's loyal to friends, and if they're in a fight, he's going to be on your side in the fight, said Representative Tom Cole of Oklahoma. That instinct was on display last week when Nunes withheld information about the intelligence reports he had seen from his own committee while rushing to share the information with the White House. And if the White House provided him with the information in the first place, what might even be the point about that? The move outraged Democrats and was seen even by some GOP members as a tactical mistake. Nunes apologized the next day. Loyalty can sometimes make you, go a step too far, Cole said. I'm pretty heartened that Nunes recognized that within 24 hours and moved to change it. Before the Russia issue, Nunes was mainly known in intelligence circles for his role as an architect of the GOP's politically charged investigation of terrorist attacks on U.S. facilities in Benghazi, and his preoccupation with the fate of an obscure U.S. military outpost in the Atlantic Ocean. That facility, this is interesting, Lajes Field, I have no idea whether I'm pronouncing that correctly or not. It's a remote, it's Lajes, at least spelled in English. Who knows how that's pronounced in the native language. It is a remote U.S. Air Force base in the Azores, which again, am I pronouncing that correctly? Azores. I know I've seen the name of the islands, but it may be Azores, or I don't know how we do it in English. Windswept islands 1,000 miles from Europe. Nunes, a descendant of immigrants from the Azores, I'm guessing, waged a lengthy campaign to compel the Pentagon to relocate a major intelligence base in the United Kingdom to the Azores, which I think we learned that he was of Portuguese descent, and I think that they administer the islands. I don't know whether it's national territory or what, but okay. Anyway, how about that? So moving a major intelligence base from the UK, close to Europe, to the Azores, far from Europe. Pentagon and U.S. officials objected, citing prohibitive costs and concerns that civilian employees of the Defense Intelligence Agency, which supplied a large share of the workforce for the UK base, would refuse to move there. You could see it being a problem. England versus Azores. I mean, it's a nice vacation spot, perhaps, but okay. Nunes responded, by inserting a provision in a spending bill that stripped housing allowances for DIA civilians overseas. He's going to kick them into pocketbook in case they refuse to move there. Isn't that interesting? And then, of course, they would be forced to move there and they wouldn't have a housing allowance. What a nice guy. The language was subsequently removed, but administration officials saw it as a sign of how Nunes operated. Nunes became an early supporter of Trump and was particularly influential in shaping his national security team, which sucks. Nunes, I added that part in case you were wondering. Gosh, that's out of character for the Washington Post to say. Nunes urged Trump to install retired U.S. Marine General Jim Mattis as defense secretary. It worked. For CIA chief, Trump turned to a close Nunes ally from the House committee, Republican Congressman Mike Pompeo of Kansas. Nunes had been at odds with Trump in a few cases, most notably when Nunes said that Trump was simply wrong about the claim that Obama had ordered a wiretap of Trump Tower to listen to the Republican presidential candidate. But those differences have been rare and seem not to have jeopardized Nunes' standing with the president. Unlike Trump, Nunes is a constant critic of Russia and Putin, but the chairman had argued with intelligence agencies about their conclusion that Russia's assault on the presidential campaign, which involved the release of tens of thousands of emails from the Democratic Party computer networks, was designed, at least in part, to help Trump win. In December, when the Washington Post reported that the CIA had reached that conclusion, Nunes dismissed the findings, saying it was based on a lot of innuendo, lots of circumstantial evidence. That's it. Nunes went on to suggest that the FBI didn't agree with the CIA and sought to stage a showdown before the committee. When intelligence officials declined to appear, noting that they were still finishing a final report on the matter, Nunes issued a news release blasting spy agencies for withholding information from Congress, like he did. We want to clarify press reports that the CIA has a new assessment that it has not shared with us, Nunes said, like you didn't share what you had. The move angered then CIA Director Brennan, who placed a series of calls to Nunes to remind the chairman that he had been briefed on the latest Russia intelligence. Former officials familiar with the matter said that Nunes did not take Brennan's call for nearly 2 days, speaking to the CIA director only after Nunes had issued his press release. Brennan went public himself on December 16th, saying that the FBI, DNI, and CIA were all in agreement on the Russia hacking and its aims. There is strong consensus among us on the scope, nature, and intent of Russian interference, Brennan said in a public statement. Langer, Nunes' spokesman, said Friday every element of that account is false. When Brennan's staff sought to arrange a call, Nunes could not participate in the call immediately because he needed to be in a location where he could access a secure line, and that call was then arranged for the following morning, Langer said. That's actually the end of the article, and it occurred to me about midway through that the reason I had put that one aside was for the weird story about the Azores Islands, which, again, I hope I'm pronouncing correctly. Just sort of an interesting sideline for Devin that, who cares about stuff like that ordinarily? And I mean, I understand the importance of heritage and everything, but how long has it been since his family was in the Azores Islands? And is it going to help anybody that he knows? Does he still have family there who would get work at the defense installation? Seemed like an odd story. And that didn't even bring up the part I thought we were going to get to, or the story I thought we were going to find, which was going to highlight the fact that Nunes apparently turns up in a couple of these pre-inaugural meetings with Turkish officials, Turkey now being on our radar almost as frequently as Russia. Now, where did we find that one? And did I note that one here? There's so many pieces floating around here in Pocket. I just have to open up a few of them that are not readily identifiable from the tag that Pocket has attached to them and see if that's it. No, let's see. This one was the one about Ivanka Trump and her no parking signs. That's supposed to be out of here. All right. Was there more then? I'm sure that there was a story that we had put aside about this, but I guess it's seems to have wandered away on us here. Maybe we'll stumble across it on our way through a couple of other stories. There were some other things that I thought were of interest on other bit players around here, some bigger, some smaller, in the Trump saga. So let's just, I don't know, I guess at this point we'll just scatter some more dots on the map and see if we can connect them in later shows. It's getting weird out there. There was a new story this morning about Paul Manafort, which seemed a little bit out of left field, but I think we ought to put it on the record. It's still early in this story. Paul Manafort's puzzling New York real estate purchases. Seems connectable, right? And there was something about the way they characterized this that I thought would make it interesting. It'll probably ring the bell for you, too. This is actually a WNYC radio report, but we could play it at 7 minutes, but then we'll get in copyright trouble. So instead, we'll read the story accompanying it. Thank you, Arliss. She says it's pronounced Azores. Is that an anglicized pronunciation? What do people there say? They say we call it something completely different. Azores. Okay. I think that's how we say it in America, and I don't know whether that's, maybe because it's Portuguese territory, I thought they might say Azores. They might. All right, from now on, I won't. This is the way Americans and bunny Americans alike will pronounce it, and ugly American be damned, Azores from now on. All right. Paul Manafort's puzzling New York real estate purchases. This piece from, Ilya Maritz and Andrea Bernstein, the bylines at least on the written side of this thing. Paul J. Manafort, the former Trump campaign manager facing multiple investigations for his political and financial ties to Russia, has engaged in a series of puzzling real estate deals in New York City over the past 11 years. Who knows anything about puzzling real estate deals in the New York City area involving weirdo Russians and Trump-related people? Anybody ever heard anything like that? Real estate and law enforcement experts say some of the transactions fit a pattern used in money laundering. I say again, money laundering. Sound effect again, right? So, okay, money laundering. I know a guy in New York real estate and related to the Trump campaign who's sometimes engaging in patterns used in money laundering. Maybe they know each other. Together, they raise questions about Manafort's activities in the New York City property market, while he was also consulting for business and political leaders in the former Soviet Union. Second opinion, by the way, coming in, Parlio, much closer to the European scene because he's in the middle of it, says he hears it pronounced in the UK as the Azores. So that still doesn't solve the question of that final E in there, Azores, right? I don't know. Anyway, stress on the second syllable, Azores. This is I'm fed up with these islands already. Okay, well, we'll have to Kickstarter to send me to these islands and ask locals, how do you pronounce this place? Although, how will I even buy the ticket? I can buy the ticket online and just type in the name, right? I don't have to pronounce it to anybody. Really, maybe we should lower the cost. Kickstarter to pay for the phone call and translation services, so I can call the Azores, these islands, honestly. I'm sure there's an online pronunciation guide to it somewhere. I just don't. I don't have a producer to go and do that, but I have you. So, all right. Consensus among English speakers in England and English speakers here in the United States is that it's two syllables anyway. Azores or Azores, and not a third syllable. Azores. Okay. We may all be wrong, but who knows? Where were we? Yes, right. Paul Manafort is laundering money in the New York real estate market. Between 2006 and 2013, WNYC radio reports, Manafort bought 3 homes in New York City, paying the full amount each time so there was no mortgage. Then, between April 2015 and January 2017, a time span that included his service with the Trump campaign, Manafort borrowed about $12 million against those 3 New York City homes. One in Trump Tower, one in Soho. Is it in Trump Soho by any chance? And one in Carroll Gardens, Brooklyn. Manafort's New York City transactions follow a pattern. Using shell companies, he purchased the homes in all-cash deals, then transferred the properties into his own name for no money, and then took out hefty mortgages against them, according to property records. Buying properties using limited liability companies, LLCs. How often have we heard that one? It isn't unusual in New York City, nor is borrowing against a home to extract money. And there's no indication that Manafort's New York real estate borrowing spree has come to the attention of investigators. In an emailed statement, Manafort said, "My investments in real estate are personal and all reflect arm's-length transactions." We shall see. Ricky the Kanakistani, so also another of our English-speaking friends, and typically our pals are English-speaking. The radio program is conducted in English. We are going to be self-selecting that way. She agrees 2 syllables is the way to go on those windswept Portuguese-owned islands in the Atlantic. Okay, so what about these arm's-length transactions for Mr. Manafort? Manafort's 2006 purchase of a Trump Tower apartment for all cash coincided with his firm's signing of a $10 million contract with a pro-Putin Russian oligarch, Oleg Deripaska, that was revealed last week in an investigative report by the Associated Press. We just heard about that one a few minutes ago. For the Carroll Gardens home, a brownstone on Union Street, Manafort recently borrowed nearly $7 million on a house that was purchased 4 years ago for just $3 million. How do you even... Now that's something... I know it's not unusual to borrow against equity, but $7 million borrowed on a house that was bought for $3 million. The loans, dated January 17th, 3 days before President Trump's inauguration, were made by a Chicago-based bank run by Steve Kalk, a Trump fundraiser and economic advisor. C-A-L-K, by the way. Okay. 9 current and former law enforcement and real estate experts told WNYC that Manafort's deals merit scrutiny. Some said the purchases follow a pattern used by money launderers, buying properties with all cash through shell companies, then using the properties to obtain clean money through bank loans. In addition, given that Manafort is already under investigation for his foreign financial and political ties, his New York property transactions should also be reviewed, multiple experts said. I guess the implication here is that it might not be necessarily his money that is used by the LLC to buy the property for all cash, but then he claims to be either the sole proprietor or controlling partner in the corporation and transfers the properties to his personal holdings and then borrows against them. Interesting. One federal agent not connected with the probes, but with experience in complex financial investigations, said after reviewing the real estate documents that this pattern of purchases was worth looking into. The agent did not want to speak for attribution. There are active investigations of Manafort's Russian entanglements by the FBI, Treasury, and House and Senate Select Committees on Intelligence. Manafort has denied wrongdoing and has called some of the allegations innuendo. Deborah LaPrevot. Don't know how badly we're mangling that last name. A former FBI agent said the purchases could be entirely legitimate if the money used to acquire the properties was clean money. But, she added, if the source of the money to buy properties was derived from criminal conduct, then you could look at the exact same conduct and say, oh, this could be a means of laundering ill-gotten gains. Although, that doesn't tell us much either. She's just defined money laundering for us. Last spring, the Obama Treasury Department was so alarmed by the growing flow of hard-to-trace foreign capital being used to purchase real estate through shell companies that it launched a special program to examine the practice within its Financial Crimes Enforcement Network, or FINCEN. The General Targeting Order, or GTO, required that limited liability companies disclose the identity of the true buyer, or beneficial owner, in property transactions. In February, FinCEN reported initial results from its monitoring program. About 30% of the transactions covered by the GTOs involve a beneficial owner or purchaser representative that is also the subject of a previous suspicious activity report, it said. The Trump Treasury Department said it would continue the monitoring program. According to reports, Manafort was first introduced to Donald Trump in the 1970s by Roy Cohn. That has come up in the past. The former aide to Senator Joseph McCarthy, who went on to become a prominent and controversial New York attorney. Long active in Republican politics, Manafort has also worked as a lobbyist for clients who wanted something from the politicians he helped elect. His former firm, Black, Manafort, Stone, and Kelly, and we've mentioned them in the past too, and yes, Stone is Roger Stone. And Black, I believe, is Charlie Black, right? Black, Manafort, Stone, and Kelly, I don't know the Kelly, represented dictators like Ferdinand Marcos in the Philippines and Mobutu Sese Seko of Zaire. In the 2000s, Manafort created a new firm with partner Rick Davis. According to the recent investigative report by the Associated Press, Manafort and Davis began pursuing work in 2005 with Oleg Deripaska, one of the richest businessmen in Russia. Manafort and Davis pitched a plan to influence U.S. politics and news coverage in a pro-Putin direction, the AP said. We are now of the belief that this model can greatly benefit the Putin government if employed at the correct levels with the appropriate commitment to success, Manafort wrote in a confidential strategy memo obtained by the AP. And like most strategy memos, it's mostly garbage, but it's incriminating garbage in this case. In 2006, Manafort and Davis signed a contract to work with Deripaska worth $10 million a year, the AP reported. Also that year, a shell company called John Hanna LLC purchased apartment 43G in Trump Tower, about 20 stories down from Donald Trump's own triplex penthouse. Manafort confirmed that John Hanna is a combination of Manafort's and Davis's respective middle names. The LLC was set up in Virginia at the same address as Davis Manafort, the consulting firm, and of a Delaware corporation, LOAV Limited, for which there are virtually no public records. It was LOAV that signed the contract with Deripaska, not the public-facing consulting firm Davis Manafort, as the AP put it. A lawyer for John Hanna LLC signed the deed on apartment 43G for $3.675 million in November of 2006, but Manafort's name did not become associated formally with the Trump Tower apartment until March of 2015, 3 months before Trump announced he was entering the presidential race in the lobby 40 stories down. On March 5th, John Hanna LLC transferred the apartment for $0 to Manafort. A month later, he borrowed $3 million against the condo, according to New York City public records. A year later, Manafort was working on Trump's campaign, first as a delegate wrangler, then as campaign manager. Trump's friend and neighbor had become a top advisor. In a text message that was hacked and later obtained by Politico, Manafort's adult daughter, remember this one? This was the other daughter, though, Jessica Manafort, wrote last April, Dad and Trump are literally living in the same building, and Mom says they go up and down all day long hanging and plotting together, which is exactly as I suspected. Thanks for the news, Mom. In August 2016, the New York Times published a lengthy investigation of Manafort, alleging he'd accepted $12.7 million in undisclosed cash payments from a pro-Putin Ukrainian political party between 2007 and 2012. Manafort resigned as campaign manager, but according to multiple reports, didn't break off ties with Trump, who remained his upstairs neighbor. The White House press secretary Sean Spicer said last week that Manafort played a very limited role for a very limited period of time in the Trump campaign. Davis did not return WNYC's call for comment, but in an email exchange with the AP, he disavowed any connection with the effort to burnish Putin's image. My name was on every piece of stationery used by the company and in every memo prior to 2006. It does not mean that I had anything to do with the memo described, Davis said. All right, now back to the pattern of possible money laundering, right? Trump Tower 43G was not Manafort's only New York property. In 2012, another shell company linked to Manafort, MC Soho Holdings, LLC, purchased a fourth-floor loft in a former industrial building on Howard Street on the border of Soho and Chinatown for $2.85 million. It's not Trump Tower Soho. Okay. In April 2016, just as he was ascending to become Trump's campaign manager, Manafort transferred the unit into his own name and borrowed $3.4 million against it, according to publicly available property records. The following year, bought for $2.85 million in 2012, borrowed $3.4 million against it by April 2016. The following year, yet another Manafort-linked shell company, MC Brooklyn Holdings, Soho Holdings, and MC Brooklyn Holdings, purchased a townhouse at 377 Union Street in Carroll Gardens for $2,995,000. This transaction followed the same pattern. The home was paid for in full at the time of the purchase with no mortgage. And on February 9th, 2016, just after Trump won decisive victories in Michigan and Mississippi, Manafort took out $5.3 million of loans against the property. Some of these transactions were first reported by the blog Pardon Me for Asking and by The Atavist. So a generous citation to original reporting done by blogs here by WNYC. Good job. New York Times famously terrible at that. Though the deals could ultimately be traced to Manafort, his connection to the shell companies would not likely have emerged had Manafort not become entangled in multiple investigations. Public records dated just days before Trump was sworn in as president show that Manafort transferred the Carroll Gardens brownstone from MC Brooklyn Holdings to his own name and refinanced the loans with the Federal Savings Bank, in the process taking on more debt. He now has $6.8 million in loans on a building he bought for $3 million. Records show. How do you get that? David Rice, a professor of real estate law in Brooklyn College, initially expressed bafflement when asked about the transactions. Rice then looked up the home's value on Zillow, a popular source for estimating real estate values. The home's Zestimate, Zillow, Zestimate was $4.5 to $5 million. How do you borrow 6.8 on that? I don't know. Rice said, unless there is another source of collateral, it is extremely unusual for a home loan to exceed the value of the property. I do think that transaction raises yellow flags that are worth investigating, he said. Reached by phone, Federal Savings Bank President Kalk, remember him? C-A-L-K, one of President Trump's earliest fundraisers and now a Trump economic advisor, said he couldn't discuss the loan, but he expressed confidence that it was over-collateralized, meaning that more than sufficiently backed by the home's value. In a statement, Manafort said, as is standard, the loan amount is based on the appraised value of the property after renovation, not the property value as is. It's unclear where Manafort got the money to purchase the 3 New York City properties. It's also not entirely clear why he borrowed about $12 million against those homes, which were already paid for. In his statement, Manafort said the Brooklyn loans were for architectural and contracting work. But as of February 1st, New York City Department of Buildings records show that the borough commissioner has ordered all work stopped at the Carroll Gardens address due to applicant withdrawal. Well, that's very interesting, and there's a lot of question marks about that one. I mean, in addition to how you borrow $6.8 million against a building worth $5 million, I do not know. Certainly saying it's over-collateralized raises some questions as well. But then also the question of why pay for these properties in full in cash, no mortgage, and then in some cases immediately borrow against them? Why not just borrow the money for the mortgage? Pardon me as I stretch here. It's a little bit of a puzzle, and I guess that's the usual explanation for something like that is, well, you were using somebody else's money to buy the apartment. Though it does sort of look like maybe part of the laundering came afterwards too, right? You maybe use somebody else's money to pay cash for the apartment, and then you borrow money against it, but you borrow more than the property is worth, but you borrow it from a bank that's run by a friend of yours who is a big Trump supporter, and I don't know. I mean, maybe the allegation is Trump leans on him to make that loan because he doesn't want to pay Manafort he doesn't want to pay him, period. And Manafort's looking for a payday, and Trump is looking not to pay him. Maybe he arranges this business deal on the side to get that done. I have no idea, but it's another fishy lead, and another one we'll likely be hearing about more about in the days to come. Let's see. Other sort of fishy weirdness that surrounds Trump. Well, gosh, there's so much of it. Of course, it's been floating around for a long time. But one of the things that I put aside a while ago and we never got around to discussing was the weirdness of Steve Bannon still coming to light. Oh, by the way, let's see. There's another... before I move on from Manafort, there was a thread the other day. I'm trying to look and see whether it says anything new or different from what we were looking at. I mean, I guess it's another source of money. This one from Andrea Chalupa, whose name has come up a couple times in the past, or who I see a lot on Twitter, and I don't know. I'm not certain exactly who she is. She's a journalist and author, is how she describes herself. But I see her name in often in what I'm going to say off the top of my head is sort of like an uncomfortable proximity to the Louise Mensch orbit. But I don't know whether they really have anything to do with one another, but just saying that there might be perhaps a grain of salt called for in digesting this thing. This is a thread, she says, about Russiagate and Paul Manafort's $10 million a year contract to further the interests of Putin's government, mentioned in the AP article cited in the previous couple of reads. Tweet storm goes like this. 1, active intelligence community agent told me Russia developed Trump for over a decade and could have arrested him for sex crimes, but instead collected compromat. So, did Trump do P-gate? Well, that might or might not be what they're hinting at, but even if it is, it's still not much more than a shadow at this point, and who knows why they're saying it. Number 2 here, Manafort awarded massive contract / presented master strategy to politically further Putin's interest the same year he moved into Trump Tower. That also mentioned in the previous article. Manafort worked for one of Putin's closest oligarchs. This is essentially working for Putin. Strategy was to benefit the Putin government. Remember, this is a tweet storm here, so everything is shortened. Manafort's strategy promised to further Putin's interest in U.S. media and business, paid $10 million a year, helped having close friend and neighbor like Donald Trump. Manafort and Trump were already old friends. Likely Manafort knew he could rely on his old friend and neighbor in furthering his Kremlin work. After the contract was over, Manafort worked for a Putin puppet in Ukraine, later overthrown for killing protesters. Manafort's client fled. Putin invades. When Manafort went to work on the Trump campaign around March of 2016, anyone following Ukraine knew this was troubling. And then number 8 here, Manafort close with overthrown Ukraine president who ran the country like his own ATM, enriching his children, beating journalists, and killing protesters. Given the harassment my sister, this is Andrea Chalupa saying her sister, faced in investigating Manafort, knowing what Donna Brazil meant when she said DNC staffers feared for their lives, given Manafort, Flynn, Stone, Page, Caputo, Epstein, Conway's husband, and other Russia ties on Trump's core campaign team. Can't help but think today of what this IC agent told me. Trump never wanted to win. They made him run. He's trapped, and now the intelligence community is closing in. Very interesting in terms of upping the level of intrigue here. But its verified value, I don't know. But this is where speculators are expanding on what the last couple of articles have been able to lay down somewhat more substantively and a little bit closer to the facts and evidence. But it's interesting, no doubt, and part of the puzzle, and we're going to have to try and figure out how much of it to accept at face value. All right. Let's see. Other pieces of the various puzzles. I guess before, should we do Bannon or should we do more Ivanka? We were already on Ivanka yesterday. And I guess I'll add to the Ivanka stories these notes. One, a piece from the Independent, the UK paper, noting that Ivanka Trump's family skiing is funded by the taxpayer. And everybody sort of knows about that, and everybody knows that, for instance, that they brought so many Secret Service agents with them. But this piece in particular, Maya Oppenheim, writing this one for The Independent, noting taxpayers can't afford Meals on Wheels anymore, but they can afford to pay for Trump's kids to vacation, says one critic. Illustrated, the piece is, by a mountaintop photo of the family members in all of their ski gear, looking like they're having a good time. We're getting our money's worth. Ivanka Trump has sparked outrage for the cost of her family's spring break holiday in Colorado. President Donald Trump's daughter, her husband Jared Kushner, their children, and the president's other son Eric reportedly required 100 Secret Service agents to travel with the group for the trip. I don't know if all 100 traveled, whether there were some from field offices in Colorado or what, but anyway, the U.S. Secret Service, funded by U.S. taxpayers, of course, is reported to have spent $12,208 on ski equipment rental and clothing at Aspen Valley Ski and Snowboard Club. They had to go ski with them, I guess. Fellow holiday goers at the high-end ski resort in the Rocky Mountains voiced their anger about the Trump family's presence. Some expressed their annoyance at struggling to get dinner reservations and increased traffic in their area. Dozens of residents staged an impromptu protest to voice their opposition to the president's cuts to the Environmental Protection Agency. According to the Aspen Times, data on the Federal Procurement Data System found the Secret Service signed a contract last week for $12,208 for leasing or rental of equipment, clothing, and individual equipment and insignia for the trip. But the ski club's director told the local paper the club does not rent ski equipment, and he knew nothing of the contract. I see all the checks that come through here, and I certainly didn't see one from the Secret Service. So for me, this is entirely out of the blue. Of course, they could have rented elsewhere. An anonymous Aspen area law enforcement source suggested the rental equipment might be for Secret Service agents protecting members of the Trump family while they're on the ski trip. Another anonymous law enforcement source said roughly 100 Secret Service agents were expected to accompany the family. It's a big gathering. So lots of discussion about this one, but one of the things that you should keep in mind, of course, is that when the Trump family travels and the Trump family jets, remember how that arrangement works, right? Trump's jets aren't owned by Donald Trump. They are owned, like everything, by a company controlled by Donald Trump. And it's TAG Air, the Trump Air Group. So, yes, the name of it is actually Trump Air Group Air, TAG Air Incorporated. Ricky asks, why do they need 100 Secret Service agents for 6 people? And the answer probably is if you're going to be there for a week, they all need to take shifts. And, they don't actually all really need to be guarded by the Secret Service. And, again, you know what? Here's a question. They need to have Secret Service agents, I guess, skiing on either side of them all the way down the hill. But anybody can wander into the grill room and take an Instagram photo of the president sitting in Trump National Golf Course. How's that happening? I don't know. All the agents are out there skiing, and that's why Devin Nunes can wander in and out of the White House grounds without being seen also. I don't know. Anyway, I'm not really sure that they needed that many. I'm not really sure that they used that many. What was more important to me was, remember that when they travel on Tag Air Airlines, Tag Air is allegedly a business, and they charter jets, and they charge money to fly on those jets. That's not an issue for the Trump family. One, because they're supposedly rich, but two, because they control both sides of that transaction. So here's the deal. Here's why it's beneficial for him to do stuff like this and to own things in this way. Well, for one thing, of course, there's tax considerations. But for another, for Donald Trump to travel on one of his jets, he needs to charter it through Tag Air. Tag Air charges money to charter these things, the fuel costs, the seat costs, etc., taxes and whatnot from the airports that they use, all kinds of costs go into flying these things. But it's okay, because in the end, Tag Air charges Donald J. Trump money, or they tell Donald J. Trump, money needs to be paid in order for you to fly to this place. Donald J. Trump tells the Trump organization, cover my costs, pay Tag Air for my trip. It seems dumb, but that's what taxes require of us, to keep this as an arm's length transaction. And don't worry about it. I'm not sad because, of course, the Trump organization takes $100,000 from a bank account he controls and puts it in another bank account he controls, that of Tag Air Incorporated, and no one's any worse off. So for the Trump family to charter their own jets seems stupid, but it's no skin off their nose. But guess who has to go with them on their ski trip? 100 Secret Service agents. When Secret Service agents have to travel with these guys, they too have to pay pretty expensive prices. And a charter air flight like that on a luxury aircraft, after all, is a pretty pricey thing. How much does it cost to fly from Washington, D.C. to wherever they land to go to Aspen on a charter jet like that? Well, I don't know what the answer is, but I know that the answer is too much. And I know what happens to the money. The United States Treasury pays, on behalf of the Secret Service, Tag Air for 100 seats on a luxury charter to Aspen for the week. Who keeps the money? Tag Air. Who is Tag Air? Donald Trump. So every time the Trump family goes on vacation or travels for business or travels for any reason, every time Melania comes to Washington to fly down to Mar-a-Lago or meets him in Florida at Mar-a-Lago, they're flying on Trump aircraft. It's being chartered. Secret Service are buying seats. She's buying a seat too, but that's just moving money from your left pocket into your right. When the Secret Service goes, it's moving money from your tax-paying pocket into their pockets. So that's what you really need to remember about things like their Aspen travel and, for that matter, their Mar-a-Lago travel. Interesting, and I don't want that lost in the shuffle. What other things? There's another data point out there we'll save for another day about Ivanka. I just want to note for the record here, is this the San Jose Mercury News? Do I have their location right? I don't know. That seems to ring a bell for me. Anyway, it's the Mercury News, either way, and I think it's San Jose. Anyway, they have an interesting piece here. Ivanka Trump played key role in her father's failed and potentially corrupt Azerbaijan hotel deal, report says. This is an older deal, but this is the one that may have made it onto your radar. Martha Ross reports for the Mercury News here. May have entered your radar because they were partnered with entities that were said to be connected financially to Iran's Revolutionary Guard. It's amazing how many organizations like this we run into that have accountants and spokespeople and are investing in hotels. Wasn't ISIS rumored to have a hotel at some point? Anyway, this is coverage of actually a lengthy new investigative story in the New Yorker, revealing that Donald Trump and his Trump organization helped build a hotel in Baku, the capital of Azerbaijan, a project that the magazine says appears to be a corrupt operation, Trump's worst deal ever, and possibly a conduit for illegal activity by Iran's Revolutionary Guard. And I guess Ivanka had a hand in that too. Maybe we can find some time to discuss that, but I wanted to at least put that one out there. Before turning to, let's see, shall we hit some politics as well? Before we get into this weirdness about Steve Bannon, why don't we try and do that? I'll remind you, of course, that looming out there and now getting an increased amount of discussion in the mainstream news media, the looming deadline for government shutdown, that becoming more of a possibility every day. It may, in fact, be the capper of the fantastic 100 days, perhaps the most failed 100 days of any modern president for Donald Trump. Why is this happening? Well, Brian Beutler has a guess, just to insert some pure politics back into this political talk show, with a piece in the New Republic explaining, as he sees it, why Republicans are ruling with utter incompetence. The answer, in short, is there's no other way for them to rule, but here's why that's the case. This dysfunction, Brian says, is the result of years of bad faith opposition to Obama. Interesting. And a related concept, I think, to the campaign in a box idea. That is to say, if you're told what to campaign on and it's all sort of spoon-fed to you, then when it comes time to govern, unless you've been spoon-fed policy ideas, which they have not been, you have no idea where to go. In this case, we'll let Brian tell his story. Congressional Democrats kicked off the first term of the Obama administration, having controlled the House and Senate for just 2 years. Consecutive landslide elections in 2006 and 2008 left their caucuses overrun with unseasoned legislators, steeped in opposition politics, that would be opposition to George W. Bush, of course, and beset by conflicting priorities. Yet somehow, they devised and passed the most far-reaching legislative agenda in half a century without the luxury of a cooling-off period. This is important. As Paul Ryan sees it, this was some kind of miracle. At a Capitol briefing on Friday, he explained the failure of the GOP's American Health Care Act as a consequence of growing pains that come with moving from an opposition party to a governing party. This is a comforting thought for a House Speaker who, despite Republican control of all levers of government, is staring into the political void. But as the Democratic majorities of 2009 and 2010 show, growing pains are not an immutable fact of legislative politics. Republicans controlled the House for 6 years and the Senate for 2 before Donald Trump became president. If anything, the transition from opposing to governing should have been easier for them than it was for Democrats 8 years ago, and yet it's proving much harder. There is a coherent story that explains why Republicans, at their historical apex of power, are also historically dysfunctional, and healthcare is a huge part of it, but it isn't a story Ryan will be able to piece together until he accepts the central role he played in it. If a party can move from opposition to governing fairly seamlessly, as the Democrats did, why couldn't the GOP? The differences between the 2009-era Democrats and the 2017-era Republicans lie to a large extent in each party's conduct while toiling in opposition. In Ryan's mind, all opposition is total and unscrupulous. We were a 10-year opposition party where being against things was easy to do. He acknowledged that's part of it, right? He acknowledges part of it at this same press conference. You just had to be against it. And now, in 3 months' time, we tried to go to a governing party where we actually had to get 216 people to agree with each other on how we do things, and we weren't just quite there today. We will get there. Why 216? Because there's some vacancies in the House, right? So you don't need 218 anymore to be a majority. This, though, is a false construct, Brian argues, a way to rationalize dysfunction as akin to rust, an inevitable consequence of powerlessness, rather than the completely avoidable consequence of years of disgraceful behavior. There is a more nuanced version of the 10 years out of power story that doesn't write Republican agency out of the equation and thus homes in, he says, on the single root of their electoral success and factional incoherence. It has been nearly a decade since Washington Republicans were in the business of actual governance, wrote The Atlantic's McKay Coppins, echoing Ryan. Whether you view their actions as a dystopian descent into cynical obstructionism or a heroic crusade against the left-wing menace, the GOP spent the Obama years defining itself deliberately and thoroughly in opposition to the last president. Rather than engage the Obama White House in a more traditional legislative process, trading favors, making deals, seeking out areas where their interests align, conservatives in Congress opted to boycott the bargaining table altogether. This cuts closer to the truth, but it presents the question of whether Republicans behaved cynically or in principled fashion as a subjective matter when it is anything but. There has been no shortage of evidence confirming that Republican leaders in 2008 settled on an opposition strategy of massive resistance before Obama took the oath of office. Obama could conceivably have advanced an agenda that was so ideologically unpalatable that it retroactively vindicated Republican cynicism. Instead, Obama seized the center, and many Republican members had to be strong-armed into uniform opposition, including to the Affordable Care Act. The depiction of Obamacare as a many-tendrilled monster strangling human liberty was not the GOP's instinctive ideological reaction to the bill, but an outgrowth of a strategic choice the party made to deny Obama any claim to having forged consensus. This decision led to a number of awkward reversals, such as when GOP leaders and right-wing propagandists drove Senator Chuck Grassley from acknowledging a, quote, bipartisan consensus to have individual mandates, unquote, to validating death panel conspiracy theories in a matter of weeks. The upshots of adopting such an absolutist facade can be strung together into a fateful parable of sunk costs. 7 years later, it is still impossible for Republicans to admit that, contrary to their initial portrayal, Obamacare is simply what a market-oriented national health insurance system looks like. By closing off the one avenue by which transactional Republicans might forge a healthcare détente, people like Paul Ryan guaranteed the entire party an eventual reckoning with the basic idea that every American deserves affordable medical care. Rather than make the unpopular counter-argument and oppose the Affordable Care Act on the basis of ideological differences, Republicans adopted an unprincipled strategy of attacking and promising to remedy the law's every weakness, even when their promises cut against conservative orthodoxy. Obamacare was a useful tool for them, the conservative writer Philip Klein wrote Friday in a withering critique. For years, they could use it to score short-term messaging victories. People are steamed about high premiums? We'll message on that today. People are angry about losing insurance coverage? We'll put out a devastating YouTube video about that. Seniors are angry about the Medicare cuts? Let's tweet about it. High deductibles are unpopular? We'll issue an email fact sheet, or maybe a GIF. At no point were they willing to do the hard work of hashing out their intra-party policy differences and developing a coherent health agenda, or of challenging the central liberal case for universal coverage. Klein called Republicans a party without a purpose, but it is just as likely that they are a party that put achievable goals out of reach by indulging in expedient pandering. Their plan's only weakness was that it might someday end in success. Trump, in particular, embodies the real but temporary political advantages of shamelessness. Politicians who win by saying anything will be expected to deliver everything. This isn't just a story about the contradictions between Trump's fraudulent campaign and his denuded administration. It's the story of how the ruthless pursuit of power left an entire party unable to exercise it now that it's theirs. Very interesting. I like the conclusion. I liked actually the paragraph just prior to the conclusion that points out that the 10 years that they spent in opposition to everything Obama did was all about the registration of that opposition, but no demonstration of what they preferred instead. So they were issuing press releases, putting out YouTube videos, tweeting their opposition, spinning conspiracy theories, telling stories about death panels, etc. But they really they devoted no time whatsoever to what to do instead. And then when they were put on the spot, right, like as everybody has said, the dog that finally caught the car, they didn't know what to do with it. Also a very interesting take. I wanted that one out there for your consideration. And just to put this one on record, too, the piece that Armando sent yesterday from Mike Allen at Axios, which I've really been trying to avoid using, but look, what can I tell you? They're on this is the right beat, I think. This story here, GOP scrambles to defuse shutdown bomb. We're going to have to start counting down to this one. A top Republican with close ties to the White House tells me that after the GOP failure on health care, a government shutdown looming when a continuing resolution runs out on April 28th, as Joan told you. It's now more likely than not. Wall Street is not expecting a shutdown and markets are unprepared. But I think we've seen the markets start taking a nosedive in the last day or two. So maybe they're baking that into things after all. Chris Kruger of Cowen Washington Research Group, it's written here today, but this is yesterday's piece, will warn financial clients, hello, April 29th, government shutdown. That, by the way, day 100 of the Trump presidency, it's worth noting. A senior Republican aide disputed the bearish forecasts and said the White House and Republicans on the Hill cannot and won't risk a shutdown. Given the last week, it's out of the question. Very likely true. That would, of course, just lead to, it's fixable with short-term, or for that matter, if they want, long-term, continuing resolutions. But, for the guy who was elected to Washington to shake things up and make big changes and ram through big cuts or whatever, and reinvent government, a continuing resolution doesn't seem like it really is going to live up to the hype. So what do they have to say here? Reality check. While the GOP may have the will, party strategists don't see the way. The bleak House Republican math remains with no sign it'll change, and the GOP can't count on the twin Hail Marys floated over the weekend, either enlisting moderate Dems, as they reported yesterday, or the Congressional Black Caucus, as Jonathan Swan revealed in his Sunday night newsletter, Sneak Peek. Yeah, that doesn't sound particularly likely either. Another bullet point here. The message CEOs took from Friday's fiasco, according to an executive at a money center bank. Holy crap! We may be facing the same crap on a shutdown threat and on the debt ceiling. Holy crap! We may not get tax reform or a repatriation bill or infrastructure spending or substantial changes to regulations. That one they can get through. He doesn't know what he's talking about on that one, but okay. Last bullet point here, be smart. Job one for Republicans who technically control the government. That's interesting. Technically. How do you... okay. No, they control the government. It is to convince investors and voters that they have some path to getting things done. But first, they'll have to convince themselves. In other words, they have to show that they can govern. I'll add that. Axios, just a little bit too bullet pointy and flippant for me, but okay. That means we get done with that one quickly and can move on to something else. So I'll appreciate it for what it does for us. All right. Let's see. Time. Yes. One more bit. Dang. Breitbart and Bannon becoming more and more a distant possibility. Okay. There was another thing about Nunes. I'm sorry, I got the pronunciation wrong again. That I wanted to add here. This time, a diary from Poll Watcher from the weekend over at Daily Kos. I knew we had this somewhere. Flynn and Nunes together in any context, I think, is probably pretty eyebrow-raising at this point. Flynn and Nunes met with Turkish officials in January. How many dots are there? By Poll Watcher over at Daily Kos. I thought we should just enter this one onto the record. And it's just a quick and dirty hit, and we'll put it out there as another point worth watching. Let's see. He or she begins off by saying, looks like I picked the wrong week to quit drinking. Trying to connect all the dots is making me really dizzy. Okay, you've all heard about how Flynn was a paid agent of Turkey. Yes, we did hear about that one. It may be part of the investigation. Yesterday, the Wall Street Journal reported a story about this crazy stuff. Woolsey, that would have been he's a former CIA director, right? And other people present at the meeting. Which meeting? It was a Wall Street Journal piece. Could we open that one up, or is that paywalled? let's see, that piece entitled ex-CIA Director Mike Flynn and Turkish officials discussed removal of, once again, I've forgotten the pronunciation of the president of Turkey. Erdogan, foe from U.S. So where did I think I bookmarked how to pronounce his name. I'm going to just do it right here live because it's pretty integral to the news. And how many times have I been through this and not gotten it correct? And then we finally learned the pronunciation. Oh, look, here's one with a nice, we can play it on the air even. Let's see, is the sound up? Oh, it's going to take a while to load, huh? Okay. Erdogan. Okay, yeah, there we are. Okay, Erdogan. So we'll keep that one in mind for about 10 seconds before I get it. Erdogan. So really, it's just replace that G with a W will do the trick. Erdogan. Okay. Back to the story here. That's the Wall Street Journal reporting. This is an interesting thing. Yeah. Oh, thank you. There's Michael Musson chiming in right there saying the G is silent in Turkish. I should learn this. By the way, full disclosure, guy who cuts my hair is Turkish. I don't want anybody bringing that up at some point like, oh yeah, well you have your own Turkish connection. I don't know whether he's a United States citizen or not. I believe he seems to be a permanent resident. Whether he's applied for citizenship or is anywhere on the horizon, I don't know, but he's Turkish. And I hear about Turkey from time to time through him, and this will eventually come back to haunt me. But I do need a haircut. That means I'm going to be seeing him soon, and I'll ask him about that. And he's told me about the guy in the past that they're looking to remove here, this Muslim cleric, whose name begins with a G, too. How do we pronounce that one? If it's silent, Michael, what do I do? And it's got like an umlaut in it appears too. How about that? Can anybody pronounce? It looks like Gulen, Gulen, but I'm sure true Turkish pronunciation will elude me on this one. But okay, back to Poll Watcher's summary. The Wall Street Journal reported Friday that James Woolsey, and other people present at the meeting, which meeting? A January meeting of some kind, somewhere, confirmed that Mike Flynn, former national security advisor forced out over connections with another country, Russia, was coordinating with officials from the cabinet of right-wing Turkish President Erdogan. And I'm going to skip over the rest of the names here. I've just barely been able to figure out how to get the last name pronounced here. In anticipation of extraditing Fethullah Gulen, Gulen. No idea how that would be pronounced. I'll ask the guy if I go and get my hair cut, and I, again, fully disclose that he's Turkish, and you're free to surveil me with a FISA warrant if necessary. We don't talk about that much. Anyway, extraditing this guy back to Turkey should Trump win the presidency, but not just extraditing him, okay? So, Turkish national living essentially in exile in the United States. He's a religious figure, and from what I've heard in passing, well before we ever discussed any connections with Flynn or anything like that, this guy was, the guy who cuts my hair is not a tremendous fan of any political figures in Turkish circles that I'm able to discern, and maybe he's just being politically correct and talking with all of his clients. Who knows whether it's that or something else. But anyway, not a real fan of this guy either, but interesting that the Erdogan government is interested in getting him back for prosecution because he is a foe. That's why he's living in exile. But traditional extradition won't do, I guess, because probably the United States doesn't recognize the necessity of arresting and extraditing this guy for crimes alleged by the Turkish administration. Anyway, it seems more like political prosecution than anything else, I would guess. So, Flynn wants to satisfy his Turkish clients in some way and begins discussing a dead-of-night operation intended to circumvent normal U.S. extradition laws, according to Woolsey. Anyway, the meeting took place on September 19th, and Woolsey said he arrived late, only to be startled and alarmed that the discussion was treading into potentially illegal territory. Interesting. I guess, and at this point, do they note this in the article? At some point, there are several meetings going on with Turkish officials in which Flynn is involved, and the Nunes involvement, I guess, doesn't come during this September meeting, but later on during, I guess, a January meeting. So it may have no connection whatsoever as between Flynn and Nunes and their involvement in discussing things with Turkish officials. But it's just interesting. Turkey just keeps coming up. Turkey and Cyprus, which is also close by and at least partially, all I remember is the conflict history of Cyprus. I don't know where they stand now in terms of their self-government, but I remember that for many years there was the tremendous conflict between Turkish and Greek communities in Cyprus. And that probably is, I don't know. I don't know whether that's long since resolved and I'm just living in a 1960s construct here or what. But I'm not up to speed on my Cyprus thing. It's just that it keeps coming up in the news. So anyway, the diary continues. Now we know that Flynn was being paid by Turkey, and he was already planning to do some big favors for Turkey. So a few days before the inauguration, he meets again with Turkish officials. And who happens to be at the same meeting? And according to these tweets and this screen grab from where? What's this publication that they're referencing? I think I can click on it and open it up, or possibly not. Okay. Oh, I've opened it twice here. Let's see. Oh, and it brings us to the tweets and not to the source that they're grabbing from. Okay, well, I'll have to refer you to the article, and you'll take a look at that and see where this is all from. But the source here claiming, look who else was in that very meeting with Flynn and Turkish officials, and this would have been a January meeting, not the September meeting. Foreign Minister of Turkey plus Mike Flynn and Devin Nunes at the Trump Hotel in Washington. Met with General Flynn, who will assume the position of National Security Advisor, and other officials at a working breakfast in Washington, D.C., the foreign minister notes. He tweeted, the meeting marks a first direct reach out between President Erdogan's administration and the incoming Donald Trump administration, other than a phone call between the two leaders last November. House Intelligence Committee Congressman Devin Nunes, a Republican heavyweight, which I would dispute, also attended the breakfast. Could be a very widely attended thing if it's a breakfast, but it's just out there. Nunes was certainly a member of the Trump regime's transition team, our diarist writes, but the article above describes his role in the Intelligence Committee. Why was he there? Did he notify any other members of the Intelligence Committee that he was there in an official capacity? And then he begins asking, well, what about this idea of this strange extrajudicial removal of Erdogan's political opponent from the United States to deliver him back to Turkish jurisdiction? However, in the update at the end, just to be perfectly clear, and it might even obviate the need for this diary entirely, but the update says we're talking about two separate meetings, and I'm glad we kept that clear all the way through. The September Flynn meeting is where the abduction stuff was discussed, and it hasn't been reported exactly what was discussed at the January meeting that Nunes attended. But another thing that we have to be on the lookout for, and another dot that may end up connecting itself. Thank you. Michael sends us pronunciations here, a link for pronunciation to this exiled cleric's name. Let's see. Oh, is it going to pronounce it out loud for us? Let's see.
Fethullah Gülen.
Gülen. Fethullah we got right.
Fethullah Gülen.
Gülen. There's sort of a G to that, right? I mean, I can't quite hear whether that's just sort of a guttural Y, like Gülen. But I'll ask when I get my hair cut, perhaps. Not that I'll be able to remember exactly what I'm told at that point. Anyway, that leaves us about 15 minutes, a little bit less really, to go over just a few other stories that are floating out there as well. I apologize that some of these can't be connected just yet. I think we're just going to have to do some pondering on this, and some other people are going to have to come up with some of the connective tissue to make anything out of this, if there's anything to be made out of it. But I feel like we'd be missing out on an angle if we don't jump out on a few of these things ahead of time. However, let's see. Definitely a few other directions we could be going, and my strong preference is to go back here and start hitting Bannon as he deserves over some of the weirdness surrounding him. However, there is this other piece here that might fit better. Maybe we can dedicate another day to Bannon instead. And this connects a little bit more closely to what we've been talking about. Now, this one, where did I take notes? Very often I try to take notes about who has sent this thing to me in order to properly credit who's feeding me these sources. But I don't think that I've got it in this case. But here's the piece. And if you sent it, let me know. It's been a couple of days. It is from Radio Free Europe and Radio Liberty, which is not a source I've called out in the past here, and it gives me a little bit of pause. But it seemed like an interesting inquiry. Brian Whitmore writing this piece, Black Cash and Black Ops. And it's illustrated with a stock photography piece here of stacks of fake cash in a washing machine. Money laundering, in other words, which is what makes this whole thing somewhat connected to our previous discussions. Let's take a look at this one here. Some of the laundered Russian money, when we're all interested in laundered Russian money, was used to buy fancy cars. Some of it to purchase furs, and that's wrong for a number of reasons, right? Some of it paid for elite prep school fees, and some of it was spent on real estate. That's the part we've been hearing about. But at least some of the Russian black cash has also helped finance political mischief. This, by the way, here's a sidebar description. This is a blog over at Radio Free Europe and Radio Liberty. The Power Vertical is the name of the blog. The blog is written especially for Russia wonks and obsessive Kremlin watchers by Brian Whitmore. It offers Brian's personal take on emerging and developing trends in Russian politics, shining a spotlight on the high-stakes power struggles, machinations, and clashing interests that shape Kremlin policy today. That gives you some idea, at least, of what Brian's about, if not who he is. Anyway, he goes on to write the latest investigation, and here he links to whose investigation? OCCRP. That would be who? I don't know offhand. But it links to a story called The Russian Laundromat Exposed. And the last couple of days for exposure of Russian money laundering and corruption has been pretty remarkable. Let me stick with this. The latest investigation, he says, into Russian money laundering by the Organized Crime and Corruption Reporting Project, OCCRP. And I don't know who's behind that. It's a fantastic name. I don't know whose work it is, and that's always important. Exposed the inner workings of a vast criminal conspiracy to siphon at least $20 billion out of Russia and launder it through foreign banks. That sounds like something we ought to pay attention to. The Guardian cites unidentified law enforcement officials as saying the total amount that sloshed through this massive money laundromat could be as high as $80 billion. But let's see. Most of this appears to be run-of-the-mill fraud. What kind of fraud? Run-of-the-mill fraud, tax evasion and capital flight of a kleptocracy. But for Russia, crime and corruption are often also simultaneously used as weaponized tools of statecraft, and that's kind of what makes it different over there, and kind of what makes it ticklish. We're all sort of I'm still sensitive to the whole thing about Russia this and ex-KGB that. and it still feels weird. And it still feels weird to accuse, make it sound like it's the Russians, like the Russian government. But it is and it isn't, because of this weird blurred lines, of the oligarchy, blurring the lines between officialdom and private corruption, with which you get a little bit more leeway. But makes a good comparison to the weirdness of Saudi Arabia too, right? Anyway, he continues, Brian does, saying, it's hard to imagine a money laundering operation of this magnitude involving major Russian banks and figures with ties to the Russian government and security services that isn't at least tacitly Kremlin sanctioned. And that not just because Putin wants to keep his hands in everything, because that's the best way to run an organized crime syndicate, but also you just don't rise to that level. You can't handle this much money without the government's notice, and you don't get to handle that much money unless the government is cool with it, and the government is cool with it not because you're legit, but because they're not legit, and you also are not legit and on the same side of not legitimate, so that money gets shared. That's how you get these things okayed in a kleptocracy. Mark Galeotti, an expert on Russian organized crime and security services, both organized crime and security services, same thing there, I guess, and a senior research fellow at the Institute of International Relations in Prague, notes that most of this $20 billion haul, the laundered money, was, of course, just the corrupt proceeds, of corrupt people doing corrupt things. But some of it seems to have been put to political use by the Russian security services. According to the OCCRP report, for example, some of the funds went to the Center for Geopolitical Analysis, a think tank in Poland that pushes the Kremlin's agenda in Europe. The center is run by Mateusz Piskorski, who leads the Eurosceptic political party Zmiana. What? Yeah, lots of things going on over there that I don't know about. And who was detained last year on charges of spying for Russia. Oh, no. So far, that's the only documented case of the laundered funds being used for political purposes, but Moldovan officials told Reuters that some of the money was used to advance Russian state interests. Moreover, OCCRP's co-founder, Paul Radu, who led the investigation into Russian money laundering, told me that, quote, we don't know where 80% of the money went, adding that it was largely distributed to ghost companies without clear owners. It's like a Tor network of financial transactions, he added, referring to the popular internet anonymizer. That's a lot of untraceable black cash. And this black cash is sloshing through some of the world's top banks as the Kremlin's active measures in the West are becoming ever more active, as Russia is suspected of stealthily funding political movements, NGOs, and so-called alternative media outlets in Europe, not here necessarily, that stoke fears about the migrant crisis, advocate a Eurosceptic agenda, and otherwise promote the Kremlin's agenda. Putin's corrupt system functions as a network of business relationships. Political commentator Leonid Bershidsky writes in his column for Bloomberg. It's a kind of secondary nervous system inside the Russian bureaucracy, running parallel to the official one, creating parallel chains of command, and serving different goals than the official system whose tools it uses. And we are, I think, correct if we're beginning to worry about similar developments here in the United States. We're worried about Russian influence, yes, but what if, that'd be interesting, what if the biggest Russian influence wasn't necessarily money being paid for fake news generation or influence campaigns, but rather teaching Trump and Trump officials how to construct private and corrupt parallel systems that take advantage of and leverage Donald Trump's access to official intelligence and security tools, the information from which can be laundered, leaked, misdirected, whatever, in ways that allow you to exploit them on the private side without leaving enough hard evidence to actually put a stop to it with criminal convictions here in the United States. Often, this article continues, the goals overlap, and when they conflict, there is little question of whose interests have priority. Where have we heard about things like this in the past? Here, in the last couple of months. Everything's a massive conflict of interest, and yet it's ongoing. Yet we cannot put a stop to it. The security services tolerate in Russia, monitor and recruit hackers from Russia's digital underworld. Intelligence and law enforcement agencies run protection rackets, and organized crime is allowed to flourish so long as it doesn't embarrass the state. And yes, money laundering schemes are allowed to operate. The condition on all of this is that the Kremlin can reach in at any time to use crime and corruption it has tolerated and nurtured to advance its geopolitical goals. And you can stir up a hell of a lot of mischief, buy a lot of influence, stealthily fund a lot of fake news spewing media, and secretly finance a lot of xenophobic political parties with $20 billion. Very interesting thing to keep in mind, and well worth monitoring. And for those of you who haven't seen it, I spent about 40 minutes over the late weekend taking a look at a really intricate and what appeared to be well-documented YouTube video, and I'll have to dig it up and I'll include it. I don't even know if I can find it before we close the show out, but documenting the millions of laundered dollars being moved around in Russia for the benefit of the former president of Russia, Dmitry Medvedev, a good friend of Putin's and head of the political party there in Russia, and being used to buy him fabulous properties, estates, and yachts, and foreign properties all over the place, and vineyards and everything. Not Putin per se, obviously here, but another of the top figures. But it's very widely believed to parallel the kind of operation that Putin has for himself, times 100, of course, on his part. But very interesting and amazing links and amazing sleuthing that was done. It was amazing, in fact, how many of the clues were left out on social media. Apparently, Medvedev is a bit of a technology and gadget and social media nut and keeps Instagramming himself or his friends at these properties which he denies owning. And a lot of times they're geotagged in addition to everything else. So not the brightest guy in the world. Anyway, after having revealed all of this and documented it fully and put out this fabulous YouTube video with English subtitles, he got himself arrested over the weekend. And that in conjunction with the sudden organic-looking appearance of opposition rallies screaming about the level of corruption which had been exposed as they pop up all over Russia. So they're having their own resistance moment over there too. Once again, another one of those things that I haven't quite pondered all the way through yet, but which I feel like we would be remiss if we didn't make note of them, make you aware of them, put them on your radar, much like the surprise thunderstorm this morning. Well, that ties things up nicely. What about what comes up for later today after we go off the air? Of course, next up, the after show. Wink and Justice have plenty for you. An unarmed legal resident is in critical condition after ICE agents raided his Chicago home and shot him. And as Democratic attorneys general target Trump, Republican attorneys general target them.
From Daily Kos Radio on networksradio.com. You have been listening to the Kagro in the Morning Show
with David Waldman.
Much more going on in the battle over sanctuary cities, too. Jeff Sessions stepping into the middle of that conflict. And on the last half of their show today, a visit from Chris Reeves, Tom Servo 433, for an update on the Kansas 04 special election, that is the District 04, and the Kansas Senate moving on Medicaid expansion.